I just want to say something about the um, Lockheed Martin and the arrows and the three lines and the fifth dimension about like a telepathic blueprint on a wall. Um, Seemingly based upon a shelf on the exact opposite side of the wall, ultimately getting to some two vertical lines that like absolute with a small shelf with like two triangles on either side as a support bracket. But presented the 6-point star like a delta force squared as an electronic schematic symbol for like the delta is a triangle. Okay, but ultimately it got to the alignments on the wall being just using a legal pad's edge and a pen. Ultimately went into a fifth dimension type of 5 eccentric triangles overlapping each other and becoming the exact opposite of like Lockheed Martin, the 2 arrows, the 4 lines, and the 3 intersecting axes, as compared to arrow being a asymmetrical design at the back automatically in my mind, like the HTTP : // and Austin Powers Blue Bonnet Barrel Eagle, and the structure, like Fred Flintstone like amenities, okay, the executive suite of the architecture and all that. So like anyway, so like I was thinking about that because and like the Living Color song, I tell you 1 and 1 makes 3, and there's like several issues involving like alignments and the thing about the 3 lines that seem to be the Lockheed Martin and ultimately getting to the Orion performance monitoring with the hot air balloons on it, ultimately getting to mandatory requirements of a rainbow, ultimately Fort Stockton, Texas, an identical twin rainbow of James and All unit and the plateau and in that geographical area. But in any case, so it seems to be that the exact opposite of like Lockheed Martin, reading it analytically and symbolically, having like a 232 perception, even an atonement that would be in my mind like Green Acres, da 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 da. But the fifth dimension like 5 eccentric triangles, and it seemed to be the thing about the exact opposite of like the Atlantic side, presenting the dolphins, and the color code would seem to be the Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi degree of like international electronic engineering and software engineering of special effects and audio production, and not limited to, and superimposium involving attenuation and quantum, and a color code between like Los Angeles all the way to like the University of Miami. But the thing is that there's a door lock now with like the 3 like horizontal lines, and it seemed to be almost like the 3 lines that even like Dream Theater actually uses for like their emblem. It seemed to be the 3 intersecting axes of and the 3 lines of Lockheed Martin and the 5 eccentric triangles presenting like the screensaver of the 2 eccentric triangles bouncing off each side of the monitor as a I didn't automatically at the beginning when I saw that screensaver think of HTTP : // or the design of the architecture of the state, federal, local authority structure of where that's at. It's called ARO, okay? And the thing about the 2 arrows of like Lockheed Martin and reading the 2 arrows, 4 lines, and the 3 intersecting axes, and the exact opposite seems to be ultimately the 323 area code of Los Angeles and the 5 eccentric triangles, and how Orion performance monitoring seems to have that connectivity of the song Fifth Dimension up in the air in a beautiful balloon based upon a head east point of view. What would normally be to the left of like the Pacific, it's like the scale's like phenomenally huge as compared to what would be maybe some idea of the dolphin, or I mean even the thought of television programming. I'd mentioned like a Led Zeppelin song, Robert Plant and Led Zeppelin. I have my power, I have my cauliflower. I think it's Bloomberg who knows. You said it's alright, she did it alright, it's always in my heart. But anyway, yeah, so like, anyway, that song right there seemed to be, the thing about like lastly, for real, and like my friend Flicka and the dolphin, as compared to the collie and YouTube. And it seemed to be the thing about, YouTube and the collie and the cauliflower. It's a little bit of rhyming about that one particular song with like Led Zeppelin. I have my power, I have my cauliflower. I think it's Bloomberg, who knows? You know it's alright. She said it's alright. It's all inside of my heart. And it goes on, and you know, I think that when I finish a little bit more into it, it seemed to have that significance of television programming, and the three lines of the eccentric triangles, and the screensaver of the two eccentric triangles bouncing off as a symmetrical, asymmetrical design of the architecture and platform and structure of that, representing the ACTP colon double forward slash, or the ratio double forward slash. But in case I want to include that, I'm going to keep this kind of like on the short side, and hey, it's break time already, but the thing with this, I kind of like wanted to include that while I was thinking about it, because it seems to be now, it's like the three lines, even like, you know, living color referring to, I tell you, 1 and 1 makes 3, and the symbolic representation that Dream Theater has for like their emblem, and seems to be the Lockheed Martin thing about the arrows being eccentric, yet an open line, like a rainbow and a protractor. You know, the thing about the, you know, 180 degrees, and the thing about pi r squared that way, and E equal mc squared, and ultimately, you know, exponential quotients of powers of multiplication and linguistic alphanumerics. But I want to include that because it seemed to be that the door lock, I think it's pronounced Veise, V-E-I-S-E. It's alphanumerics is 60, okay, but it's got the three lines, and it's kind of like almost the Israeli flag, and the center line of oscillation representing like monetary and domestic of the aggregates of what seem to be involving even, you know, the Sixth Temple once again. Sixth Temple, how to preserve runs the country, and the history and the description of like the U.S. dollar below the equator. And it seemed to be that center line of oscillation and that one cycle per second above the letter N in Latin terminology, above the N. It ultimately seems to be that it gets to the OSHA and the pronunciation, and yet the history and description of the U.S. dollar, yet some academic transition as Latin terminology, representative even as what I see involving like the Sahara and Sarah, and the HA being like the alphanumerics of 9, and ultimately, you know, the I, and all that stuff about, you know, the tent in the desert, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, and Sarah, and the Chase Practicum being 140 in Pearland, Texas, and the Chase Practicum Joseph being the alphanumerics of 213, ultimately, you know, the area code Los Angeles, or Chevrolet Silverado Z71 in Pearland, or the telepathic brainwave thing about the symbolic symbol between a C and a P ties on both sides of the US $1, like a telepathic mediation in the sky, and the thing about the halo left side, and all that information that seems to be ultimately getting to even, you know, the one cycle with the center line of oscillation at a 9-degree percentage, you know, even the thought of like the euro and the way of a telepathic TP with a circle with a dot. And ultimately, you know, it seems to be that it's going to ultimately lead to the, oh, thank heaven for 7-Eleven. Think about that, but Obama's referring to certain information as like pronunciation of Al-Qaeda. And ultimately it seemed to be, you know, the same principle of like the description of the U.S. dollar below the equator in the book Secrets and Temple, how the Federal Reserve runs the country, about something about Al-Qaeda, but it seemed to be likewise in practical application of principle that way, of Al-Qaeda being like the misappropriation, that allocation of like Al-Qaeda allocation, and ultimately the allocation in the pronunciation of OSHA, and that one letter N, based upon, you know, some idea of like a monetary domestic as like a redundant frequency, as a delta force, and what's involved, I guess, would what a redundant frequency would identify maybe as a grid, as neighborhoods involving monetary domestic that way. Yeah, it presents the issue similar to what would be like involving, you know, I'm assuming the Persian Gulf, as compared to what, you know, misappropriation allocation would only mean to like Amazon below the equator, with like the Nile and the Euphrates, and it presents that as like the Persian Gulf issue, and a lot of information in between, you know, the Persian Gulf and the Nile and Euphrates as compared to the Mediterranean, and ultimately gets like a huge triangle, an eccentric triangle, baseball, some idea of like using I-10 for several factors of would make it eccentric along the whole entire I-10 from like Los Angeles all the way to Florida, ultimately the University of Miami, being the eccentric thing about I-10 that way, and between the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, and all the information is like likewise in addition that actually is in the Secrets of the Temple, how the Federal Government in the country about the De Beers diamonds, European, German-owned mining raw diamonds in South Africa, and ultimately practical application to analytical. It's like, at least some idea of like Johannesburg and South America 130 and like Washington, ultimately television in Washington, D.C., and the D.C. being a dimensionally closed-like direct circuit. It seemed to be the thing about, Orion performance monitoring and AOL between like Apple and Oracle. Even the Heartbeat of America and the thing about an oblation and ablation. One in pronunciation is like the similarities in pronunciation are so close it's unreal, but an oblation and ablation, it seemed to be like a procedure that's controlling like arrhythmia and AFib, atrial fibrillation and arrhythmia. Yet another is like defined as like ultimately analytically, ultimately getting to an active God, even like 71 in Paralam. So like anyway, so like I was thinking about that because now it's kind of like the three lines as a horizontal. It almost presents the Israeli flag thing about it with a center line of oscillation and some analytical stuff about that. So like in any case, so like I was thinking about that, I was kind of like want to include that real quick. It's already gone on like pretty close to like 11 minutes and like 49 seconds right now. So like I want to include that because it seemed to be a lot of information that I'm actually hearing with a lot of songs that I'm actually really hearing in a whole different perspective, and it seemed to be the idea of ultimately Lockheed Martin and the fifth dimension like 5 eccentric triangles overlapping each other and reading it symbolically and analytically, presenting the three lines likewise with that, yet reading it analytically and symbolically would be the 323, the exact opposite of Lockheed Martin, of the 232, yet at the same location of the symmetrical, asymmetrical design, and the automatic perception of ACTP, colon double forward slash, and also powered Blue Bonnet Imperial Eagle. But anyway, I want to include that real quick. I'm kind of, hey, it's already break time. So like, anyway, there it is. I just kind of want to keep that in mind real quick while I was thinking about it. Okay, there it is, yeah.